Today on Blue 58, the Packers are shuffling their roster and Jordan Love is shuffling big stacks of cash. Welcome to a new era of Packers football.
Blue 58!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Blue 58, the one and only podcast of thepowersweep.com. I'm your host, John Meerdink. Happy to be with you here for another episode. I want to talk Jordan Love here in a second, but first, the Packers are making some moves on their roster ahead of practice today, which just wrapped up a few minutes ago as we sit down to record. Out go 3 players and in come 3 more. Outgoing is Henry Pearson, the fullback, cornerback Zion Gilbert, and kicker James Turner. Quick thoughts here. Are we at the end of the fullback era in Green Bay? We've talked about this a little bit since the Packers draft back in April. Wondering what the Packers are going to do at the position. They've kind of... Pearson was an exception. They haven't really had a dedicated fullback since Matt LaFleur got to Green Bay, though John Lovett also was one. It's been kind of a quasi-H-back sort of thing. Josiah DeGuara is the peak example of that. The Packers drafted in the 3rd round in 2020. They've always tried to have someone who's going to fill that kind of quasi-fullback, H-back sort of role. Does Pearson's departure mean that's the end of that thing, that sort of effort in Green Bay? Are the Packers going to use some kind of fullback this year? If they are, it's going to be some kind of tight end. So what kind of tight end could do it? My money would be on Ben Sims. He seems to have the best physical profile to do it. Tyler Davis maybe as well. Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave not so much, but it wouldn't be entirely impossible, though Musgrave is a much worse fit for that than Kraft is, I think. Why would you put your 6'6", field-stretching tight end in a three-point stance in the backfield? That doesn't seem to make any sense. So I don't really know of those tight ends really who would fit that kind of role. So maybe keep an eye out on that if the Packers make future additions to the roster here for somebody with that kind of skill set, because that's something that Matt LaFleur has wanted to do pretty clearly. By preference, we've seen that that's something he wants in his offense. They just don't have somebody who can do it or has done it on the roster right now. Zion Gilbert, don't have much to say there. They've got 2 other corners coming in. We'll talk about them in a second. He hasn't really done much in his time in Green Bay. Turner being on the way out is noteworthy. It has narrowed the kicker competition to 2. So we've got Anders Carlson and Greg Joseph right now, which is basically what we expected, but a little bit later. I wasn't expecting a 3-person kicker competition this far into camp, really in camp at all. But here we are. We finally arrived at that point, and so it's going to be Carlson and Joseph from family night through, I would assume, the end of the final preseason game. You might as well take every opportunity you can to get a look at these guys, and we'll see how it plays out once the kicks start, quote-unquote, counting. Incoming are cornerback Don Callis, cornerback L.J. Davis, who also goes by Alonzo Davis, or his name is Alonzo Davis, but he also goes by L.J. Davis, and long snapper Peter Bowden. Callis is a 2024 undrafted free agent, very small, 5'10", 174 pounds, a tryout player this spring. Acme Packing Company's Justice Mosqueda noted that it was the 6th tryout player who's gotten a look in camp so far this year. Davis is a bit bigger, 6'2", 200 pounds, was an undrafted free agent last year, 2023, spent some time with the Titans practice squad last year. Both of them run in the low to mid 4.4s in the 40-yard dash, which is noteworthy. Maybe special teams options for both. Davis seems like he'd be a good fit physically in that regard. Or it could be just camp bodies that you want to take another look at for potential practice squad signings into the regular season. Bowden is the real story here, I think, though. Long snapper competition is back, baby. I thought that might be the case. And I thought it also might be the case that cutting Matt Orzik, that is, could be a little bit more expensive, and that's why they set Bowden loose when they needed an extra roster spot to sign Jacob Eason, because, assumed that Orzik was just going to be more cap difficult to release in the short term, and they wanted to keep the competition going, so just cut the guy that isn't going to cost you anything. That's not the case. Orzik actually doesn't have any guaranteed money in his deal, at least according to overthecap.com, so that's not it. It's just a curiosity of roster manipulation. In any case, we are back to 2 long snappers and 2 kickers in camp. The competition continues among the specialists in Green Bay. Daniel Whelan holding things down, the lone punter on the roster right now. I think he's the odds-on favorite to make the 53-man roster, but crazier things have happened. A year ago, I would have said that was going to be Pat O'Donnell almost for sure, but you never know. And Whelan certainly pulled it out last year. But the big news in the Packers world over the past 5 days has been Jordan Love's contract. Because of where our release schedule fell and where his deal finally came, when his deal finally came, we haven't had a chance to talk about it yet. I assume by now you've seen all of the numbers. Big, important contract, of course. But I wanted to talk through it kind of more contextually than the dollars and cents sort of stuff. You don't need a numbers breakdown by this point. And the broad strokes here are they got the deal done, and that's a good thing. Obviously, it's a good thing, unless it turns out to be a bad thing. But that is true of all contracts. That's how all contracts are going to go. But this one is significant because it's a quarterback, and it means some big things, I think, for the Packers roster going forward. So a few thoughts about the Jordan Love deal. First and foremost, we are in the Jordan Love era now. Everything that happens with the Packers, with their roster, their in-season success, their postseason success, happens within the context of Jordan Love, his contract, and what that all means for the Packers. They have announced we are officially in the Jordan Love business. We are building around Jordan Love. This is what's going to happen for the foreseeable future in Green Bay. That's the route we're going. Last year about this time, I pushed back on the idea that we are in the Jordan Love era, that we were in the Jordan Love era, because where they were a year ago, we had really yet to see any kind of commitment one way or another. It was not impossible that last year could have been Jordan Love's only year as the starting quarterback. Things go really badly. He turns out to be a real jerk. I don't know. Stranger things have happened. It could have gone that way. It would have taken a lot, but it could have. But clearly that it didn't work out that way. The Packers felt that they had a good enough look at Jordan Love to give him this extension. I feel confident in that too. And so I think the contract extension puts all of that to rest. We are officially in the Love era. This is it going forward. Secondly, I want to kind of give some grace to the people out there who are caught up in the sticker shock of this. Let's put it that way. I have a bad habit. I like to read the comments. I do. I see a news article about the Packers. I click on down there and see what the people are saying because it's a special breed of person that hangs out in the comments, isn't it? I mean, just you get some real weird and wild takes in there. But it sometimes is a good way to level set on what some people out there who maybe don't dive into things super deeply are thinking. And I read more than a few comments in the wake of Jordan Love's signing that were talking about how he hasn't earned this. This is too big of a deal for the kind of player he is or whatnot. And to a certain extent, I get that. It is a big number. $220 million, just round it up a little bit. We're talking about nearly $250 million for one person, for one contract. It's crazy. It's wild. And just look at the expansion in quarterback contract numbers. Aaron Rodgers' first contract extension back in 2008, 6 years, $65 million. Put it roughly on the same timeline, that's almost a quarter of a little more than a quarter of what Love has gotten already. Crazy. 16 years ago, it's gone up that much. His first mega deal as the starting quarterback came in 2013, 5 years, $110 million. 11 years later, Jordan Love has doubled that. That is wild. 6 years ago, 2018, he signs a 4-year, $134 million contract. Love easily surpasses that. 2021, not all that long ago, Rodgers signs a 3-year, $150.8 million contract, less per year than Love is getting now. You understand why people would get the sticker shock. That's a lot of money. But the third big thought here is that you got to work past the sticker shock on all fronts for a few reasons. First, there are people out there who say nobody's worth that kind of money. You see people make that honest argument sometimes. Either sports fans or not sports fans. You'll see that trotted out from time to time. And to that I just want to say, duh, yes, obviously. Professional sports contracts are dumb. Welcome to 2024. Thank you for joining us. Nobody should make that kind of money for playing sport. It's insane that it's like this. In the context of the grand scheme of the world, playing quarterback for the Green Bay Packers is one of the least important things you could imagine. I have spent 30-some years of my life now following the Packers, and not one person of the hundreds of them that I have watched play for the Packers has had a fraction of a fraction of a fraction as much impact on my life as one of the, say, good teachers that I've had in my life, or a good sports coach even. Even somebody who is, I don't know, we go to a coffee shop in our hometown a lot, and we've gotten to know one of the people that works there fairly well. My wife and I are both on a first-name basis with this person. That person has had more of an impact on my life than any player who I've enjoyed rooting for the Packers for. Yes, that's crazy that someone would get $200 million for something like this. We all know this, but it's also supported by the market. So what are you going to do? We all get it. We're all following this. Yes, it's stupid. Who cares? Also, related to that, within the context of this sport, quarterbacks are worth that kind of money. Just consider not even the NFL as a whole, consider within the Packers right now. Would you rather pay Jordan Love $50 million, $50 whatever million dollars, whatever it works out to be on average? Would you rather pay that per year or watch the Packers with Sean Clifford just this year? I know which one I would prefer. And it's not option 2 there, okay? Having a good quarterback is worth that amount of money. And within the context of the sport, it's also not even all that much. Over the next 4 years, Jordan Love is going to take up this percentage of the cap. About. Numbers vary whether you look at Spot Track or over the cap. In this season, it's going to be about 8%. About next year, it's going to be about 11%. Next year, the next year after that, about 12%, and then 13% the year after that before it really spikes up and contract numbers get really crazy in 2028, at which point they're probably going to have to redo his deal. Do you think, within the context of what you know about football, that a starting quarterback that you like and you think you can build around is worth paying at most 13% of your cap for? I do. I think that's worth it. Fourth, consider this. The alternative was worse. Much more expensive. We're not even talking about not paying Jordan Love and just going with any random quarterback. Just not extending Love was going to get more expensive than this. Say you could get Jordan Love to play out this year of his contract, and within the context of the collective bargaining agreement, you could find Jordan Love into oblivion if he tried to not play out his contract this year. And if he holds out long enough, your contract tolls, and then you just got to do the whole thing next year anyway. So let's not take up that hypothetical of him not signing the contract or not playing this year. Let's say he plays out the deal this year, and you say, okay, when we finish winning the Super Bowl, we will negotiate with you in February, between February and March, whatever, when the league year starts, and if we can't get a deal done at that point, we'll franchise tag you. An extension next year is not going to be cheaper. Any contracts that happen between now and then, if you still believe that Jordan Love is your guy, are not going to be cheaper. Dak Prescott is floating out there somewhere, and there'll be other contract extensions in there too. The price is only going up from here. And there's no world where you sign him to what a lot of people would consider a cheap contract, like $20 million per year, $30 million per year. The 4-year, $120 million extension does not exist. It's not going to happen. But say that you can't get any contract done at all and you want to just franchise tag Jordan Love forever. Well, the franchise tag number for 2025 is projected at about $42 million right now, fully guaranteed, according to overthecap.com. That's the ballpark, like $42.1 million. All of that counts against your cap. So Jordan Love's 8% cap figure this year, around $20 million and change, a little bit higher than that, going to be doubled for 2025. Way higher than the 11% that it would have counted this year. The next year, 2026, if you want to franchise tag Love again, it's going to be $50.4 million against your cap because you go up to 120% of the previous year's salary there. Again, all of that against the cap. The next year, if you want to go into 2027, I think we're at that point, it's up to $72.58 million, 144% of the previous year's salary per the CBA. So to recap, If you want to just franchise tag him here on out, $42.1 million, $50.4 million after that, $72.58 million. That works out to a 3-year, $165.08 million contract, all of it counting fully against the cap in the year that you're doing it. It's just not going to happen. This made, in the context of the sport, doing the contract this way does make dollars and cents in addition to cents. It's a smart thing to do. This is the fiscally responsible thing to do, as weird as that sounds, to give somebody $200 whatever million over 4 years. The fourth big thing here, we had 4 sub-thoughts there. The fourth big thing here is that this is the trickiest step on what we've come to call the golden path. I use this analogy from Dune in my Mea Culpa episode about the Jordan Love draft pick. But basically, to recap my very silly analogy there, if you haven't read the Dune books, read the first 3 and part of the fourth one to just kind of get a sense for it. I think that's as far as I would recommend you going. You either really love it after that or not. But in those books at that point, Paul Atreides, who you might have seen in the movies, basically at some point in those books, he realizes that, for one thing, he can see the future. He doesn't realize that. That's a thing that just happens to him as a result of a bunch of choices that he makes. But he sees the path for the future, for his bloodline, for his children, and for the universe as a whole. And he sees the steps he has to take to get to the best possible result for all of those things. He calls it the golden path. There are things that he has to do, and some of them are very, very difficult to get them there. That's the path. That's the sort of thing that the Packers set themselves on by drafting Jordan Love. And I think the best argument against Love, and what I said at the time when they drafted him, is how narrow a path that is to success. It was very difficult to get to this point, and it actually just gets trickier from here. The first 2 steps of this 3-step process are the easy ones. You draft Jordan Love, and then you sit him for however long you need to feel comfortable with him. In Love's case, it ends up being 3 years. That's the first step. That's pretty easy. You can do that if you need to. It takes some guts. You need some institutional support. You need the right system in place to do it. But it's doable. The second step is you got to get a good enough look at him that you feel comfortable extending him. Okay, that looked fairly tricky last year for reasons that were outside of Love's control. Because everyone was playing so badly around him at times last year, and because of how that affected Love's evaluation, it was hard to feel comfortable at times just knowing what you were looking at with Jordan Love. And there are smart people that I know out there that have said, I don't know if I agree with this, that Love actually didn't play bad in the first half of the year last year. People were just that bad around him. Not entirely swayed by that, but let's say that it's true. That makes it really hard to know what you think of Jordan Love if everyone's playing so badly around him. But that is the second step, and the Packers succeeded at that point too. The third step is winning then with the guy that you've just extended. Step 3 is hard in the best of circumstances. Think of how it worked for the Packers after extending Aaron Rodgers at a couple of different junctions. They extend him in 2008. They're close in 2009. And it's possible, people forget, I think, how good that 2009 team was. They had a really good defense that year. The offense was humming along late in the season. There is a world where that's as close as the Packers ever get with Aaron Rodgers. But they win the next year. And then, of course, things look better for most of 2011. But even with that super offense, the Packers lose in the playoffs. They extend Rodgers in 2013. 2014, probably the best team during the middle portion of the Rodgers era. They come up short in the NFC Championship game again. 2016, come up short again. And again in 2019, and again in 2020, and again in 2021. Not in the NFC Championship, but you get it. And then from there, you're just playing out the string. It's easy to get close. And it's no guarantee that you're ever going to get closer than close. This is the hard part. The worst case scenario of this part may not even be close calls like with Rodgers. The worst case scenario is probably something like the Giants and Daniel Jones. You commit to him, sign him to a big contract, and he goes belly up. Even the most generous evaluations of Daniel Jones would paint him something along the lines of a good enough starter that's not quite good enough. A decent starter that's not good enough to get you deep into the playoffs or to the Super Bowl. And I think that is worse almost than not having one at all, because your paths forward from there are get rid of a quarterback who's good enough to get you into the playoffs but not win anything, or try to build a team around that guy that's good enough that you can overcome your quarterback being just okay. Those are two very tough roads to walk. So we're in step 3 now. Cross your fingers that it's better than that. And I think that the bet there is good. I want to conclude with that one. But I think, just spoiler alert for 2 thoughts from now, this is a fairly good bet. The 5th thing, though, is that this is either going to work out with Love or they're going to tear it down about 3 years from now. Look at the timing. 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 25, 26, 27, and then 28. With the 2024 season being basically a wash because of that's the low numbers in the first year of an extension always working out the way they do. But 3-4 years from now, 2028, is where the Packers would be in a position to really move on from Love, maybe a year sooner than that. In 3 years, Preston Smith is 34. He's going to be long gone before then anyway, but he would be 34. Elton Jenkins is 31. Kenny Clark is 31. Jair Alexander is 30. Devontae Wyatt is 29. Josh Jacobs is 29. Rashawn Gary is 29. Christian Watson and Zach Tom both 28. A bunch of other players are going to be 27. You're not extending that whole core into their 30s, and most of those guys aren't going to be around to even hit those ages that we're talking about. 3 years from now, the Packers are either going to be retooling for another run around Love or shedding contracts like it's going out of style. So we are in the first Jordan Love window, and now is the time. We are committing to Jordan Love. This is where things go. It's time to really start making some moves and letting the Packers be the contender that we hope that they can be. So where does all that leave us now? The final thought about Jordan Love. This is a good bet. The Packers are making a big bet here. It's a big bet because of the sticker shock, less big bet when you look at it in context, but I think we've belabored that point a little bit. But this is a good bet. All the statistical stuff points to it. Jordan Love's overall statistical resume for the entire 2023 season, to say nothing of how he ended it, the last 9 games or so, all the numbers point to this being a sustainable future for Love. We've been fooled by that before. Numbers are not always super predictive, but the breadth of stats that support Jordan Love's play being sustainable point you in that direction. All of your roster points, or all of your preparation for your roster, for your coaching staff, for everything along those lines points to this being a good bet. You've got a coach that you like. You've got a quarterback that you like. You've got a roster that works well with your quarterback and your quarterback's skills in particular. They're all aging up together. This team is gelling together in such a way that you should have a solid core of talented players who all work together well because of how they've come up together. There was no reason not to do this. We are crossing a threshold now, sure. I was thinking about dropping in sound from the first season of the show Loki on Disney Plus to kind of illustrate this point. I think the show overall is just pretty good, but there's a scene near the end of the first season that has stuck with me a little bit. They're talking to the now fired Jonathan Majors as he who remains there. And he's this guy who's essentially immortal. He's seen it all. He's done it all. He's been through every timeline and every universe, stuff like that. And they get to a point where they cross over a threshold, and he doesn't know what's going to happen anymore. And he talks about how kind of oddly thrilling that is for an immortal person who's seen it all, done it all, to be in a point where suddenly we don't know what's going to happen next. And that's kind of intoxicating and interesting. That, I think, is very similar to where we are as fans now. We've seen the build-up before. You can understand the points of roster building and how all that works. You know how the build-up goes. You know how a tear-down goes or retooling goes. We've seen that all play out. The place where things start to really get wild and crazy and fun is where we are right now. And we don't know what happens next. What is a future where you're really building around Jordan Love like? What are the moving parts? What goes well, what doesn't go well. We don't know. We've crossed that threshold. Now we just got to see what happens. Suppose we should talk about actual training camp at some point here. I'm finding it hard to talk about the Packers this year kind of in a vacuum. Because in a vacuum, and I thought about starting the whole show with this, but we had roster moves to get to. In a vacuum, I don't know if there's an area of the roster that really concerns me right now. The Packers did not have a place where they needed to have a high-stakes roster battle going into this training camp. Sure, there's some moving pieces on the offensive line, but the depth of the talent there makes it so you don't really have to worry about anything in a vacuum. There's some small roster tweaks that you can be looking at, safety depth, linebacker depth, cornerback depth, sure. But by and large, this is a solid roster. There aren't a lot of question marks about it. We're in a good spot right now, though they have, like we pointed out last week, they have yet to pay the injury man. We don't know what his toll is going to be, and it's going to come at some point here. But I think there are a few storylines that are jumping out to me, and I wanted to weigh in on those before turning you loose for today as we start to head toward family night and then preseason games beyond. First, Jordan Morgan looks to be a guard. It doesn't look like there's going to be any serious competition for him at tackle. The Packers seem to be thinking of him as a guard. Adam Stenavich said at his press availability on Monday, they really just don't want to move him around too much. They want to stick him in a spot and let him just kind of settle in there, get used to it before branching out with him and putting him into other positions. I'm not sure what I think about that idea as a whole. I would prefer for him to be a tackle, and I think the Packers would too, because that's a more valuable position. But I think just settling on where they are with their best five is probably more important than positional optimization at this point. It's kind of related to the draft point we've been talking about a couple times over the past couple months here. Getting good players is more important than positional optimization or even resource optimization. If he doesn't end up at tackle long-term, then it becomes a much weirder pick, but long-term is a long-term concern. Right now, getting their best five guys on the field is more important, and I think a front five that is Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Jordan Morgan, and Zach Tom left to right is pretty good. You could do worse than that, and that upgrades your weakest position among those five by having Jordan Morgan, a plus athlete, take over for Sean Ryan, who is, I think, just okay athletically. Eric Stokes, flipping over to defense, is probably the best surprise of training camp so far. Seem to be rave reviews about him coming in each and every day. He seems to be in good health. Who knows if that holds, but that's borrowing trouble to worry about that, so let's not. If he turns out to be good or even passable, this is just the best example of found money on this year's roster that you could hope for. Him turning out to be anything at all is an enormous, enormous benefit to the Packers because he's almost like a lottery ticket you forgot about. If he turns out to be even like 90% of the athlete that he was pre-injury, that probably makes him the most athletic corner the Packers have. Certainly the fastest, though Jair Alexander is close, but I mean, Stokes was a 4.2 guy before he got hurt. If he can be even a 4.3 guy, that puts him ahead of Alexander yet. That's pretty outstanding. The size, the length, the overall athleticism there is unique on the Packers roster. If Stokes turns out to be anywhere close to what he was pre-injury, that's incredible. And just seeing him play the way he has so far, huge, huge benefit to the Packers. You could never have enough depth at cornerback. Great stories on Stokes coming out so far. I think it's worth pushing back on one narrative that we are getting from the coaches so far. And I thought it was funny that Jeff Hafley brought this up again in his presser on Monday. Kalen King has played a little bit in the slot or a significant mentionable amount, let's put it that way, among beat writers on the scene. And even it's come up in press conferences sometimes that he's playing in the slot a little bit. Jeff Hafley is insistent that he's got experience in the slot dating back to college. That is technically true. it's not as true as the level of insistence that you're getting from the Packers on this. In 2023, according to Pro Football Focus, he played a grand total of 21 snaps in the slot, and that is the career high, because in 2022 it was 9, and 21 it was 4. It gives you a grand total, if my math is correct, of 34 college slot snaps. Technically, I suppose that is slot experience. He did play inside in college. That is not what I would consider a lot of slot experience. However, I think figuring out if he can play inside is valuable in the same sort of way that trying to figure out if Jordan Morgan can play guard and tackle is valuable. Getting some redundancy is valuable. Figuring out what guys can do is sometimes as valuable as figuring out what they can't do. If you know where the guy's weak spots are, what you can't ask him to do out there, that helps your roster building going forward. In the slot right now, we have one guy we know who can do it for sure, and a few guys that we're not sure if we can do it but have experience there. Keyshawn Nixon is the quote-unquote sure thing there. He's played a lot of slot snaps over the past couple of seasons, a lot last year, 800 total snaps on defense, the bulk of them in the slot there. But they've added options behind him. Javon Bullard can do it, Evan Williams can do it, and apparently Kalen King they think can do it as well. And I think it's valuable to have a cornerback there in addition to guys who primarily play safety, depending on your scheme needs. It's just a little bit different skill set. Seeing what he can do for you there is noteworthy. Like we've said over the past 7-8 months or so, I think we need to live in a world where Keyshawn Nixon is an option in the slot, not the only guy who can do it like we were in last year. And I think that's valuable for the Packers defense overall. I want to conclude with this. The Packers backup quarterback situation does not bother me. The Packers have struggled with Sean Clifford at quarterback in practice. Yes, that's fine. It's not ideal, obviously, but your backup quarterback basically needs to be able to get you out of a game that you're leading with a win. I think that's an ideal situation for your quarterback. Beyond that, maybe he needs to go 2-2 over the course of a month with Jordan Love out, or your starting quarterback out. There isn't really a whole lot of good examples of a quarterback coming in and saving your season, taking you from a situation where you lost your starter for the year and he came back and took you to places where you would have gone with your starter. I know the Eagles did it in 2017, but Nick Foles is basically the exception that proves the rule. More than that, it's borderline making you believe in miracles sort of stuff. In his career to the point when he took over in 2017, he was a career 60% passer, a career adjusted yards per attempt of 6.02. In the 3 games he started to finish out that season, he completed 54% of his passes for 5.16 adjusted yards per attempt. In the playoffs, he burst into flames, completing nearly 73% of his passes for an adjusted yards per attempt rate of 9.87 yards. That is wild. That is not a model that you should be building your roster around. It just does not happen that way. So could Sean Clifford get the Packers to the end of the game that they're leading with a win? Could he make sure that they just got it over the finish line? They're up 24-20 late in the third quarter, and Jordan Love tweaks a calf or something like that. Could he get them to the end? Yeah, probably. I feel fairly confident about that. With Matt LaFleur out there, with the talent that they've got at receiver, at running back, on the offensive line, on defense, Sean Clifford's probably good enough to get you out of a game in that point. Could he win the game as a starter? I'm not sure I'd bet on that. I probably wouldn't bet on that. Could he get them to 2-2 in a month where Jordan Love is out? I would say that your odds are about 60-40 against. Yeah, that's not great. Overall, it's not ideal, but you're talking about a situation that is already so dire if Jordan Love goes down for that amount of time that the chances of you getting out of it are slim at best to begin with. The odds that a backup quarterback is going to be good enough to change those odds for you is close to inconceivable to begin with. And if he was good enough to do that for you, he wouldn't be your backup to begin with. So what Clifford is what Brian Gutekunst has wanted him to be, an investment at the game's most important position. You take a swing with 5th round Sean Clifford and 7th round Michael Pratt or 6th round Michael Pratt, whatever he was, it doesn't matter. And then next year you draft somebody in the 4th round. The year after that you draft somebody in the 6th round, or you just keep doing it. You just keep doing it, and eventually you're going to get a guy who is a capable enough backup to get you through a game or a month or something like that, and then you're set until his contract runs out. But Clifford is just that lottery ticket. If he doesn't work out, they'll keep trying until they find somebody who can, because the use case for the backup quarterback is so narrow that it's just really not worth worrying about. So I'm not going to, and I don't think you should either. That's all I've got for you on this episode of Blue 58. I appreciate you tuning in. I'd appreciate it even more if you take a second and share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. It's going to help more people find the show and get more people involved in this conversation you and I are having about the Green Bay Packers, which in turn is going to help all of us, me included, become smarter Packers fans. And as I always say, smarter Packers fans are better Packers fans, and better Packers fans are what we all want to be. I'm your host, John Meerdink. We'll see you next time on Blue 58.